There were some things that I was doing that I just don't even think I've sort of unconsciously let go of. I don't do them anymore, probably because they're too hard to do.
He's the guitar god with a soul soaked in blues, a man whose fingers carved emotion into vinyl. But behind the legendary riffs and hushed interviews, Eric Clapton kept quiet storms, grudges, heartbreaks, and quiet feuds with women who dared to challenge him in the world of rock. This isn't a list of petty spats. It's 6 emotional collisions, moments that rattled a man not known for rattling. It all began with Joanie Mitchell. They were supposed to be soulmates of sound. Her lyrical genius, his mournful guitar. But Joanie had no interest in worship and even less in flattery. She once dismissed him as a man who plays sadness but hides from it. A cutting line whispered backstage that burned into Eric's memory like feedback through a broken amp. Their meetings were rare but always electric, intellectually sharp, emotionally tense, with a cold wind of mutual judgment. Joanie didn't just bruise his ego, she exposed it. She challenged his authenticity, hinting that his blues were an act, a costume borrowed from another man's pain. Clapton, who had always seen himself as a vessel of emotion, felt naked under her gaze. In a room filled with stars, Joanie made him feel like a shadow. Her superiority wasn't loud, but it was suffocating. And for Clapton, that quiet humiliation cut far deeper than any public feud. She didn't just question his music, she questioned his soul. From there, the tension only deepened with Annie Lennox. She had a voice that could freeze a room and a gaze that could slice through ego like a razor. During a rehearsal for a high-profile charity performance in the mid-18s, Annie didn't just disagree with Clapton, she dismantled him. She challenged his arrangement, reworked entire verses, and dismissed his chord progressions with the cool precision of someone who knew exactly what she wanted. Clapton, who had long been treated like royalty in any room with a mic and a guitar, felt exposed, like a relic being dusted off and judged. Annie didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her silence between critiques spoke volumes, and her calm defiance made it even worse. He left the session with his pride in pieces, the weight of humiliation pressing heavy on his shoulders. Later, in private circles, Clapton would refer to her only as the soprano with ice in her veins. Never by name. She hadn't just corrected him, she'd frozen him out, made him question whether his instincts were still sharp or dulled by decades of reverence. That moment became a scar he rarely showed, but never stopped feeling. Then came Linda Ronstadt, not just a talent but a temptation. They flirted under stage lights and shared backstage silences that felt like something more. To outsiders, it looked like sparks were flying.
Verbalizing, I just said, and as I was saying it, I thought, well, you could produce it and I'll play or something, because the thing for me was initially to get his sound.
But for Clapton, it was more than attraction. It was the hope of being understood beyond the legend. When they toured together, every duet felt like a conversation between two lonely souls trying to find harmony. But when Eric finally leaned in, Linda leaned out. She didn't just step back, she slammed the door. She later called their would-be romance a chaotic mistake with a good soundtrack, a phrase that echoed in Clapton's memory like a cruel chorus. What hurt most wasn't the rejection, it was the way she framed it. Like their connection had been a misstep in her otherwise polished narrative. Clapton, who longed to be seen not just as a guitar god but as a man carrying invisible scars, felt naked. She didn't just walk away, she laughed, leaving him in emotional freefall. And that ache, the ache of being ridiculed by someone he thought might understand, lingered for decades, staining every love song he wrote with a sadness no melody could mask. Things grew darker with Susie Sue. To Clapton, punk was chaos masquerading as revolution. To Susie, blues was nostalgia wrapped in ego. The collision was inevitable. It happened when she mocked him live on air, her voice as sharp as her eyeliner. He plays pain like it's staged. Eric, who had bled through strings, felt blindsided. It wasn't a jab. It was a guillotine. They met only once, and it was frostbitten. She reached out, maybe to extend civility, maybe just curiosity, but he turned away without a word. That moment froze in time, like a photograph no one wanted to look at again. For Clapton, she wasn't simply a punk icon. She was a living contradiction to his legacy. She embodied a movement that saw his blues as irrelevant, his success as inherited, and his sadness as manufactured. And her laughter, cold, dismissive, public, cut deeper than any review ever could. She didn't just dismiss his music, she rejected his place in history. And Clapton, who built his life on reverence and tone, was left staring into a mirror that no longer recognized him. Then came Grace Slick, a hurricane in human form. Their encounter wasn't just brutal, it was seismic. It happened in the haze of a 17s party, where smoke clung to ceilings and egos floated higher than the music. Grace, fierce and already halfway into a bottle of something strong, locked eyes with Clapton across the room. She didn't see a legend, she saw a pretender. Marching up to him without hesitation, she accused him of stealing the blues, of commodifying pain that wasn't his to begin with. "A ghost with the guitar," she hissed, loud enough for heads to turn. The room went still. Eric, used to adoration, or at least quiet deference, was stunned. Grace wasn't interested in nuance or respect. She wanted to expose. She wanted to burn. Years later, she refused to share a stage with him at a San Francisco reunion concert. Her words echoed through the community. "I don't stand beside frauds." For Eric, who had lived his life chasing the ghosts of bluesmen he revered, those words cut like glass. She didn't just insult his music, she insulted his essence. And for a man who measured legacy by the soul he poured into every chord, Grace's condemnation was more than personal, it was sacrilege. He never challenged her again. But that moment stayed in him, lingering like feedback that never fully fades. And finally, there was Courtney Love. If Grace Slick was a hurricane, Courtney was the aftershock, chaotic, relentless, and impossible to ignore. Her disdain wasn't just expressed, it was broadcast. From television interviews to scathing op-eds, she made Clapton a stand-in for everything she loathed about the rock establishment. Outdated, untouchable, and indifferent to the struggles of women clawing for space in a male-dominated arena. She didn't whisper her contempt, she screamed it. Calling him rock's privileged zombie, she painted him as a ghost of the past, still haunting the present. Her words stung, not just because they were harsh, but because they were crafted to wound. She accused him of riding a wave built by others, of profiting from a system that silenced voices like hers, and of doing nothing to make room for anyone else. To Clapton, who had spent his life crafting songs that bled with emotion, the idea that he was apathetic was almost unbearable. But he didn't fight back. He didn't write a song in retaliation. He didn't offer a quiet rebuttal. Instead, he went silent. But this silence wasn't dignified. It was riddled with doubt. For the first time in years, Clapton questioned whether he'd become what she'd claimed. Not just a man out of time, but a man who had let time pass others by. Courtney didn't just provoke him, she forced him to look in the mirror and see the cracks that fame had painted over. And that realization didn't fade with the headlines. It settled in, bitter, lingering, and impossible to forget. These weren't just creative disagreements. These were wars of ego, pride, and soul. For Clapton, each encounter wasn't merely a clash. It was a blow to his very identity. He, who had once felt untouchable, with a guitar in hand, was now surrounded by echoes of confrontation. Some laughed at his blues, others dismissed his relevance, but all of them, in their own way, cut deep. Each name was a scar, each moment a chapter of humiliation he never signed up for. He didn't scream, he didn't retaliate in tabloids, he internalized it. Every jab, every whispered slight, every onstage mockery. And it began to twist something inside him like a slow burn beneath the surface that never cooled. He wasn't a man who yelled. He didn't throw glasses against the wall or start public feuds. Instead, he swallowed the insults and buried them beneath layers of distortion and reverb. But they stayed with him. Every quip, every icy glance, every backhanded compliment. These moments found their way into his playing, into the bends and vibratos that fans mistook for art alone. To them, it was beautiful. To him, it was survival. He began to fear the silence between songs, not because of the emptiness, but because of what echoed there. Every pause was haunted by the voices of those who doubted him, of women who once stood close only to push him away. He questioned not just his legacy, but the core of who he was. And while the world heard his music, these stories, the real ones, the raw ones, remained hidden. They lived in the silence between the notes, in the pauses that said more than lyrics ever could. Sharp, haunting, and still echoing.